A young woman goes on a graduation trip to Aruba. Sunshine, friends, a final celebration before the next chapter of life. But before the trip ends, she vanishes. No goodbye, no body, no clear ending. For years, the world knew her name, Natalee Holloway. And for years, one question followed the case everywhere. What happened after she left that nightclub? The answer would not come from a search team. It would not come from a courtroom in Aruba. It would come almost 18 years later from the men who had been watched from the beginning. And even then, the case still did not truly end because sometimes justice arrives without closure, and sometimes the truth is not enough to bring someone home. In May of 2005, Natalee Holloway was 18 years old. She was from Mountain Brook, Alabama. She had just finished high school. Like many young people at that moment in life, she was standing between two worlds. One chapter had ended, another was about to begin. Before college, before adulthood, before all the decisions waiting ahead, Natalee traveled to Aruba with classmates on a graduation trip. To the outside world, Aruba looked like paradise. Blue water, warm beaches, hotels full of tourists, music at night, a place where families come to relax and young people come to celebrate. But in true crime, the most chilling stories often begin in places that look safe. Not dark alleys, not abandoned houses, not hidden roads. Sometimes the story begins in a place where no one expected danger at all. Natalee was staying with her classmates. Her luggage was packed. Her passport was in her hotel room. She was supposed to fly home, but she never made that flight. And that missed flight became the first sign that something was terribly wrong. On the night before she was supposed to return home, Natalee went out with other students. She spent part of the night at Carlos Charlie's nightclub in Oranjestad. It was the kind of place where tourists gathered. Bright lights, music, crowds, noise, a place where one person could be standing beside you 1 minute and disappear into the crowd the next. That night, Natalee was seen leaving the club. She was not alone. Reports say she left with Joran van der Sloot, a Dutch teenager living in Aruba, and two brothers, Deepak and Satish Klopo. That moment became the center of the case, not because it explained everything, but because it was the last confirmed point before Natalee vanished from public view. From there, the story becomes a maze. Different statements, changed story, searches that led nowhere, question with no clean answer. When morning came, her classmates prepared to leave Aruba, but Natalee was not there. Her belongings were still behind, her passport was still behind, and the island vacation turned into an emergency. For Natalee's family, the nightmare began with confusion. At first, there is always that tiny space where hope still feels stronger than fear. Maybe she's lost. Maybe she's with someone. Maybe she will walk through the door. Maybe this is all a mistake. But when hours passed, hope began to change shape. It's become panic, it's become phone calls, it's become searching, it's become asking strangers if they had seen her face. Beth Holloway, Natalee's mother, traveled to Aruba and began pushing for answers. This is one reason the case stayed alive for so long. Natalee did not become a forgotten name. Her family would not allow that. They searched, they spoke publicly, they kept pressure on the investigation, they asked the same question again and again. Where is Natalee? And when no one could answer, the world started asking too. Very quickly, attention turned to the people last seen with Natalee. Joran van der Sloot became the name most closely tied to the case. He was young. He lived on the island. He had been with Natalee before she vanished. But suspicion is not the same as proof. That is what made the case so frustrating. There were arrests, there were interviews, there were search, there were theories, but there was nobody. No final physical evidence that could close the case in Aruba. And without that, the investigation became trapped in uncertainty. The public wanted answers, the family wanted answers, but the legal system needed evidence. And every time the case looked like it might move forward, it slipped back into the same dark place. Questions, delays, contradictions. Silence. Natalee Holloway's disappearance became international news. Her face appeared on television across America. News crews traveled to Aruba. Reporters stood outside hotels, police stations, and beaches. People who had never met Natalee felt like they knew her, and that public attention became both powerful and painful. Powerful because it kept the case alive. Painful because every update brought hope, and then disappointment, a possible lead, a possible witness, a possible location, a possible confession. Again and again, the case seemed close to an answer. Again and again, it failed to bring Natalee home. For her family, this was not just a mystery. It was daily grief. They were now watching a story. They were living inside it. As the years passed, the world changed. New cycles moved on. New cases appeared, new headlines took over, but Natalee's case did not disappear because there was something unfinished about it. There was no grave to visit, no recovered remain, no final explanation accepted by everyone. In 2012, Natalee was legally declared dead, but a legal declaration is not the same as closure. It gives a family paperwork. It does not give them the person they lost. And it does not answer the question that haunted the case from the beginning. What happened after Natalee left that club? Then, 5 years after Natalee disappeared, Joran van der Sloot's name returned to the headlines for another reason. In Peru, he was convicted in the killing of Stephanie Flores Ramirez. That case confirmed something terrifying for many people watching Natalee's story. The male long connected to Natalee's disappearance was now convicted in the death of another young woman, but still Natalee's case remained unsolved. The strangest turn in Natalee Holloway case did not happen in Aruba. It happened years later through a federal case in the United States. In 2010, Joran van der Sloot contacted Beth Holloway through a plan that federal prosecutors later described as extortion. He claimed he could provide information about the location of Natalee's remains and the circumstances of her death. For a mother who had been searching for years, that offer was cruel beyond words. Imagine being told that the answer you have prayed for exists, but only if money is paid. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, van der Sloot received money and then gave information he later described as worthless. That federal case stayed open for years, and eventually it became the door that forced him into a U.S. courtroom. Not for Natalee's killing itself, but for the attempt to profit from her family's pain. That is the painful truth of this case. The legal path to a confession came through extortion and wire fraud. Not through a murder trial, not through a recovered body, not through a complete ending. In October of 2023, Joran van der Sloot stood in federal court in Alabama. He pleaded guilty to extortion and wire fraud. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. But the biggest moment was not only the sentence. As part of the plea agreement, he had to give truthful information about what happened to Natalee. And after almost 18 years, he confessed. According to court records and reporting, van der Sloot said he attacked Natalee on a beach after she resisted his advances. He said he placed her body in the ocean. For the public, it was shocking confirmation. For Natalee's mother, it was the answer she had chased for almost 2 decades. Beth Holloway said he was no longer just a suspect. She called him a killer. Those words matter because for 18 years the case had lived in uncertainty. Now the uncertainty had a name, but still, Natalee was not found. This is what makes the Natalee Holloway case so haunting. There was a confession, there was a sentence, there was a courtroom, there was answers, but there was still nobody. And without Natalee's remains, the family was left with a kind of closure that is incomplete. They knew more than they had known before, but they still did not have everything. No final resting place, no full physical confirmation, no way to bring her home. That is why this case never truly ended, because justice is not always one clean moment. Sometimes justice is a sentence. Sometimes justice is the truth being forced into the open. Sometimes justice is a mother hearing the words she waited years to hear. But closure is different. Closure is peace, and in this case, peace came only halfway. Natalee Holloway's stories remain powerful because it's not only a story about one night in Aruba. It is a story about how quickly a normal life can change. It is a story about a family refusing to let the world forget. It is a story about media pressure, legal limits, false leads, and the long road between suspicion and proof. It is also a story about the cruelty of not knowing. For years, Beth had to live with questions that most families could not survive. Where is my daughter? Who knows the truth? Why will no one say it? And when the answer finally came, it came from the person who had caused the pain. That is not the kind of ending people hope for, but is the ending the case received. A confession, a sentence, a truth spoken too late, and an empty space where Natalee should have been. Natalee Holloway left for Aruba as a young woman celebrating the future. She never came home. For almost 18 years, her case became one of the most famous missing person stories in the world. Then at last, the man long watched by investigator admitted what happened. But even with that confession, that deepest wound remained. Natalee was still missing. Her family had answers, but not all of them. And that is why this case still stays with people, because the most painful mysteries are not always the one with no answer. Sometimes they are the ones where the answer finally comes. But I still cannot bring someone back. Rest in peace, Natalee Holloway, and may her story never be reduced to a headline. She was a daughter, a friend, a young woman with a future, and a name the world never forgot. What do you think hurts more in cases like this? Never getting the truth, or finally hearing it when it's already too late?